I'm H. Melvin James. I'll be reading from my novel, Tares Among the Wheat. You might want to stop this video and go get your favorite beverage, sit back and listen to me as I read from this novel, and you can decide then if you should want to go out and buy a copy of this novel for yourself. This audio video, I'll be reading about 6 pages from this novel, Tares Among the Wheat. It's a literary fiction novel in 2 volumes. I'll be reading from the first of these 2 volumes. I'll be reading a passage of the primary frame story. In this story within a story, Arnold McClary, the great-grandfather of the primary story's main protagonist, Amelia Mead, meets a gypsy woman who will become his dear friend. Now I begin reading Tares Among the Wheat, Volume 1, Chapter 6, The Vardo. Arnold was admiring 2 showy watches in the shop's front window display when he saw a reflection at his side. The sight startled him. He froze for a second. The scene was not logical. He was standing bent at the waist to view the watches in the window display, and yet the face beside him was at the same level. The person standing near was no taller than a child, but the ghostly figure was nothing at all resembling a child. The face was round and light brown skin, the color of milky cocoa in a cup. It was the face of a middle-aged woman. She had a tangle of coarse white hair that radiated out of her scalp, such that her head resembled a giant dandelion puffball. It might have been comical if not so frightful. Then the strange person spoke. "Badges of honor, power and beauty, worn to instill love, fear, or duty." Arnold turned and straightened his posture in a single coordinated motion, confidently, to portray his regained composure. Looking down at her now, the little woman's raised chin was no higher than his navel. She stood motionless, her expression curious. Arnold could have appreciated a look of either friendliness or threat, but this peculiar expression gave him unease. The brown skin covering her face appeared to overlay a thick layer of soft tissue that padded her skull, subduing its features. Her face was crazed with 1,000 wrinkles in all directions, but none were deep or distinctive. Arnold imagined her cheeks would be soft to the touch, like the palm of a new pigskin glove. Astonished, Arnold realized his gaze had been captured. He was now peering hypnotically, eye to eye with her. Her pupils were like polished beads of black onyx, centered in settings of white mother of pearl. All parts of her eyeballs glistened with tiny flashes as a shot glass in firelight. Until the first 3 words were uttered, Arnold did not realize he was speaking at will and not at all tranced. "I beg your pardon, madam. Were you addressing me?" The little woman finally broke her eye contact and smiled. "Badges and pendants, emblems for the impressionable, from heathen to queen, priest to sheriff, from mankind's beginning and to its end shall it be." The peculiar little woman's smile grew more intense. Vardo was not sure if it was a smile of friendship, humor, or mischief. She spoke again. "I was reminded just now of a past acquaintance of mine. She hawked her handcrafted jewelry along the streets of Baltimore." The strange woman tilted her head up and sang, "Badges of honor, power and beauty, wear them to instill love, fear, or duty." Ha ha ha! Her laugh seemed genuine and uninhibited. It was difficult for Arnold to resist joining in. Vardo glanced about as he laughed to see if there were onlookers to give him reason to feel embarrassed. The curious woman lowered her voice and resumed talking. That was her barking cry to those passing by, she added poetically. Then she again abruptly altered her tone. Do not buy any of those watches. They are priced far above their value, and they are not reliable time trackers of your valuable time. I have a watch that is perfectly suited for you. Accompany me to my wagon, and I will show it to you. The strange woman spoke with an Eastern European accent. Ardle was acquainted with a myriad of foreign accents, a familiarity gained from the ever-churning mix and influx of New York's masses of immigrants and visitors. As he turned obediently to follow the little woman, he was not sure if he was going under his will or hers, but in the back of his mind he was confident that he could take care of himself. He had heard many of the stories about gypsies' tricks, bait and switch, intoxicate or drug, and then roll, hawking silk purses made of paper, or selling glass as diamonds and jewels. He also knew how to avoid having his pockets picked, and how not to give in to the threat of a false accusation. She talked as they walked. She was spry and quick in her step as well as in her speech. The beautiful watch I have is of such grandeur it will even make your banker envious. The watch is made of exquisite gemstones, leaded crystal, and the finest of precious metals. It is thickly plated with a 10-carat gold. When they reached the wagon, Ardle noticed that the mules' feed sacks had been removed and put away. The ugly asses turned their heads and looked at him, this time in unison. They looked at Ardle as if they had expected him to come back their way, and as if to say, "Hey, chump, we knew you would return under our master's influence." Ardle wondered if the lady had an accomplice. How else could she have moved the feed sacks, put them away, and met him at the shop window so quickly? Was her companion now lying in wait in the shadows with a club in hand to knock him unconscious? Ardle imagined how they would roll his limp body on the ground and pick his pockets as the pockets turned up. His front pockets might be first, then roll over to the side, around the back for any hidden pockets, and finally roll to the other side. They would then roll him like a log into the gutter, where he would be mistaken for a drunk. He would thus have been duly rolled. The thieves would then quickly leave town. But of course, Ardle concluded, that is why the mules remained harnessed to the wagon, to effect a prompt departure. But for now, there was still too much activity on the street. Too many passers-by to assault their victim unnoticed. If he would be assaulted, it would be later. Meet my mules, Barry and Jeremiah. I call them Bear and Jer. Get acquainted while I fetch the watch for you to examine. But be wary, they bite strangers. Ardle stepped up to the haw mule and quipped, Bear, I presume. The animal looked at him from the corner of his left eye, unmistakably a look of scorn or contempt. Ardle sidestepped to the mule's rear haunches and patted his rump, well out of biting range. The mules shuffled their hooves and shook their leather straps. Ardle heard the sound of muffled bumps inside the wagon, and then the sounds of clatter from the outside at the back of the wagon. The little woman appeared with a folding chair tucked under each arm. She was so short, she had to carry the chairs lengthways to keep them from dragging the ground. She had a tobacco sack hanging from her teeth by its drawstring. Ardle moved quickly to her rescue and grabbed a chair in each hand, holding them firmly outward, merely with his grip on the top backboard. He handled the chairs as if each was no more than a walking stick. The little woman was clearly impressed with his strength. She raised her eyebrows and smiled enough to show her teeth, still clenching the drawstring, appearing unexpectedly flawless and pearl white. She took the sack in her right hand and began untying the drawstring with her left. A lefty, thought Ardle. Another bit of oddity. She spoke as she unknotted the sack. "Set the chairs up there, next to the wagon, and take a seat." Ardo was relieved to make a seat with the wagon at his back, but on second thought, he checked the broad side of the wagon for any hidden little windows that might later quietly open and produce an arm holding a club. There was no such break in the rows of lumber. By the time Arnold sat, the little woman was coaxing her chair closer to his and looking over her shoulder to see if anyone was eavesdropping. She clutched the tobacco sack in her lap with her left hand and used her right hand on Arnold's upper arm to draw him near. She leaned in also, as well as she could with her short torso. "I am Madame Nefreda Ashkali. I would like to know your name, sir." Arda weighed the words, her tone, and the spirit of her voice. He thought, "She conveys a personality as ordinary and trustworthy as might my best friend's mother." Ardo was eager to respond in friendly fashion. "Ardo McClary, ma'am." Then after a pause, he said, "Would you please tell me your name again, ma'am?" The little woman's laugh erupted, unexpectedly powerful for such a small person, and the entirety of her face joined in the merriment, eyes flashing, smile broad, and the eyebrows lifted halfway up her forehead. She slapped her knee to expel the flood of emotion that was more than even her hearty, animated laughter could efface. It was not any exceptional comedy in Arnold's trite reply that spawned such an outburst. It was the subtle comedy attached to the instant breakdown of the preceding tension. Those tense feelings spawned by a happenstance meeting of two strangers, each suspicious of the other, and each simultaneously surprised by the euphoria of an instant friendship. Arnold felt it too. Sometimes a person forms immediate feelings for a stranger, as if they have long known them. And those instant friendships are so much more fulfilling than the more mundane first meetings, when feelings seem dull and muted. In those ordinary circumstances, if the association continues at all, the relationship begins shallow and must develop gradually over time. But those slow starters might never reach enduring depth. Arnold was so caught up in the woman's glee, he could not refrain from his own exceptionally dynamic, bellowing laughter. So loudly was their resonant laughter and hand clapping that pedestrians across the street looked on in frowns and with turned up noses. Couples promenading on the opposite sidewalk rotated their heads like owls until their necks could twist no more, even after having turned their bodies also until they were walking half sideways. One man walked into a lamp post and spilled his hat, and that rekindled Ardle and Nefreda's laughter to renewed volume. Ardle and his companion seemed to appreciate every subtle and each glaring act of comedy the pedestrians unwittingly performed. Each skit became new fuel to fire their laughter, which in turn created more onlooking and more comedic behavior by the curious pedestrians. Finally, out of breath and teary-eyed, their laughter settled to chuckles. Once again sober, they found themselves clutching on one another's arms, subconsciously having maintained the positions of their respective hands for repeatedly exchanging slaps to the shoulders and upper arms of their companion, as their tickle bones demanded more relief than laughter alone could deliver. Gasping for breath now, the little gypsy woman finally gave her much belated reply to Ardle's last remark. "If you please, Mr. McClary, you may simply call me Neffy." Ardle smiled. Then you should call me Ardle. And if I may ask, who was the fine artist that painted the murals on the wagon? The signatures here and there appear to read Gypie. The little woman continued to smile, but her smile was now of just one corner of her mouth, more typical of a tease than simple cordiality. Well, are you not the careful observant, and a critic of fine arts as well, I presume? I will own up to my name. Many years ago, there was a farm family that took care of my papa and me while papa was down with pneumonia. That was the winter of '65. I was a little girl then. Those kind folks took to calling me Gypie. They spoke the name so affectionately that I sort of grew fond of it. Now, if you should come to feel it is appropriate, you may call me Gypie." The peculiar woman's expression changed, as if an opposing spirit within her had grasped control. "But I warn you, friend Ardle, if you ever cry out Gypie or Gypsy in mock or scorn, I will put a spell on you, and you will awake the next morning to find you have sprouted the hairy tail of a dog." Then the Gypie's face lit up like morning sunrise as she slapped Ardle's shoulder and howled a laugh that echoed from the canyon of the building fronts. Only then did Ardle realize that he was the butt of her tease. He could feel from the strain of his eyebrow muscles that he must have allowed his eyes to open as broad and as silly looking as a child listening to a ghost story. "Now, friend Ardle, let me show you the watch." She took Ardle's left hand, pulled it toward her, and turned it palm up. Then she shook the cotton cloth tobacco sack from its bottom seam. Ardle watched as the bulge of its contents slid down the length of the sack to flash its freedom in a brilliant display of gold, reflecting the array of street lamps and storefront lighting. This has been a brief reading from my literary fiction novel, Tares Among the Wheat. This reading was from the first of 2 volumes of that epic novel. My narration was of the primary framed story. The characters in this passage, Ardle and Gypie, continue significance for much of the framed storyline. I will be reading other randomly selected passages from either volume of my novel from time to time. Tares Among the Wheat is available from all major online booksellers in hardcover, paperback, or ebook formats. Follow me on Twitter or friend me on Facebook. This is H. Melvin James bidding you farewell.